In this episode of Off the Table, the Warhammer 40k show, we're going to be talking about how to go from zero to hero in Warhammer 40k, where you should start as a beginner in order to get confident to go to maybe a tournament, play at your local club, but ultimately get started to play. And that's really where we're at. So today I'm joined with Lee. How you doing, Lee?
I am great. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm very good. Looking forward to diving into this topic.
Yeah, it's very broad, but I think we can dive into it and try to dissect some information for the audience out there. Okay, first question is, so Mr. Stephen Box. There's so many factions, maybe like 16, 17 different factions?
Yeah.
You know, you're new to the game, you want to play, your mates may be playing and they're playing like, let's say Eldar. Where would you suggest someone would start and what would be the faction of choice? Because obviously Space Marines and Tyranids, they're the poster boys, but you might not like Space Marines. Where'd you start?
Well, yeah, I think that is the common debate is where you should start. And I think typically Games Workshop promote the Space Marine stuff. I think they've always been in a starter set, whether they were against Tyranids in this edition, whether they're against Necrons in the last one, or Death Guard in the one before that. And the emphasis is always there on the Space Marines. You know, there's lots of different chapters, lots of different colors. I think they're somewhat, you can resonate with them a little bit, like you're kind of these souped up knights in shining armor, essentially, but in the 40,000 millennium. But I don't know if it is the best place to start. I don't think Space Marines is the best place to start in as a new collector.
Yeah.
Now, we do need to preface this with, of course, you need to enjoy your hobby. So Absolutely. You're going to need to build these models. You're going to need to paint these models. So you should somewhat decide to go with something you enjoy, right? Or you'll maybe like the look of.
That's my take on it. I've never really looked at data sheets when you're maybe new to the game and you've got limited funds. You don't really want to spend on a codex, so you just go, right, I want to pick up this Dreadnought because it looks cool, or this Dreadnought, or this tank, and then I build from there. And I've always played with the armies that I like and the units that I like, and then I'll make something from that. But going back to what you said about the Space Marines, you said about it doesn't really be a good starting point. It's like everyone starts with the poster boys, Ultramarines Blue.
Yeah.
And then as you've started to play and you get better and you understand more about the game and the lore, and then you see like Dark Angels or Blood Angels, you can actually now in the new edition cross over to that faction with those units. So having a Space Marine army allows you to jump in and out of other factions somewhat.
It's probably the most
versatile
and good investment for sure.
Yeah.
However, I don't know if it's the best place to start for a beginner. And the reason why I say that is because let's assume you like all the models in Warhammer 40,000, or you like enough of the models from a range to just get the most out of building and, actually enjoying to paint. But if we think about the problems that you have as a beginner, well, first of all is how easy are they to build? Okay. How easy are those models to paint? How many models do you need in a collection to actually get started?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, how complex is that army to play? And I think Space Marines, if we go over them one by one, they're fairly easy to build, which is good. They're fairly easy to paint.
Agreed.
However, this is where you get spoiled for choice. There are so many data sheets, so many different things that you could choose that actually you can end up buying lots of everything and none of it really working together.
No, true.
And also with Space Marines, they're very complex in regards to a lot of overlapping rules. So that means you're going to constantly need to check your data sheets. Whereas if we look at other armies with a smaller collection, something like Custodes, I think Custodes are a fantastic beginner army.
Yeah.
Because they're also quite forgiving.
Okay, yeah.
Because you're going to make mistakes as a beginner. And when you've got a Custodes army, extremely durable,
2 up, 4 up.
2 up save, 4 up invulnerable save, even a feel no pain.
Yep.
If you misplay that unit and it's out in the open, you probably, on average dice, can weather some good shooting or a combat.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think because there's limited data sheets and Custodes, easy to build, probably even easier than Space Marines.
Yeah.
The models are even easier to paint. for the majority. You know, it's gold. You know, a rattle can do a lot of that. You can paint some robes with some contrast or speed paints.
100%.
And all of a sudden, you've got a good looking army. You don't need that many models because they're quite
Points costing
per model. Also, there's minimal data sheets. You've got 1 box of Guardians. You've got 1 box of Terminators. Wardens and some bikes.
Less to think about on a tabletop, less data sheets. 100%.
So now what you've got is the interest becomes in the characters. What is my character going to do for my unit? Because if you've got 5 units on the table, and I always suggest when you're playing the game, start with spamming, and that basically means taking multiples of the same unit. Not because it might be efficient, just because if you're going to move that unit over the course of the game, you're going to look at that data sheet in your first game 5 times to see how far it's going to move, right?
Yeah, well, in the current data sheets and meta, you can only have 3 of the same unit or 6 if it's battle line.
Yep. If you're taking multiple of the same, so let's say 3,
you're
going to move that unit up to 15 times now versus 5 times. Because if there's 5 rounds in the battle, 5 turns in a game, you're moving that now 3 times. That's 15 compared to 5, right?
Yeah.
You're going to shoot that unit 15 compared to 5.
Yeah.
You're going to be in combat between 15 and 30 times.
Yeah.
So therefore, you're going to get that repetition effect looking at the data sheet, looking what my ability does. So therefore, you're going to all of a sudden go into your next game thinking, I know that data sheet.
More confidence, you've got more speed, you understand, you're arming like your back of your hand.
You're also going to know exactly what that unit does because you'd have had 15 different experiences across the game of I shot something, I either didn't kill or I killed it.
Yeah, and you'll also know what potentially you are better in opposed to what not so good into.
Yeah.
So that'll determine on how far you move this time and what you shoot, where you place, what you position. So.
And the other good thing about that is if you lose the first unit turn 1 or turn 2, you've still got 2 others to learn from. So you've got redundancy there. And it's not redundancy from a gameplay or a tactical play or what's good. It's just redundancy into you learning what your unit does. Now, by all means, you can do that with Space Marines. You can go out and buy 3 units of intercessors. But the likelihood is when you actually get to the later stage of your progression of a player, when you're turning up against your friends, playing at your local club, maybe even going to a tournament, you're probably not going to need 3 units of intercessors.
100%.
Because Space Marines typically work as a very 1 unit of everything. You know, like in my current Ultramarines list, I've got some Hellblasters, I've got some Infernus Marines, I've got some Stern Guard.
Yeah, 100%.
Whereas in my Custodes, I might go actually 2 units of Wardens, 2 units of Bikes, 2 units of Guard. So I've got less data sheets, more of the same. So therefore, my repetition effect is going to really combine itself to then me really understand what my units do.
Well, those Wardens as well, especially with a banner, they go up to OC3 each. They're 2 up, 4 up. Can't they pop an invulnerable save?
They can once per game have a 4+ feel no pain on the unit. So they've got
durable.
great objective control. Like you said, they can be joined by different characters. You can test out, you know, did I want to maybe advance in charge with a blade champion to make them faster and more hitting in combat? Do I want them to do some of the stratagems for free or at a reduced cost with a shield captain? Maybe you bring Trajan Valorous along so you can add in flavor through different characters joining these key units as you progress as a player. Now, another good army that I also like for beginners is Votann. For the same reason, you know, you've got limited units. It's fairly honest Warhammer, especially with the like the current indexed attachment. I think really promotes that, which is great. You know, you've got your Hearthguard, you've got your Warriors, you've got your Berserkers, and then you've got some Bikes, Sagittars in Land Fortresses. So between like 6 units, it doesn't really matter what you buy. It's all valuable. Now, you made a good point on the Space Marines.
Yeah.
And my suggestion would be, if you're going to ever buy a Space Marine army, in the game, if you paint Ultramarines blue, they typically have to be an Ultramarine.
Yeah.
However,
it's all changed, isn't it now?
If you play, or if you paint that army something like silver or gold, so I would do silver skulls Really cool army. One of my good friends, Darren Lathan, has done an amazing paint job on his Silver Skulls, and I think it made a White Dwarf magazine as well.
Oh, nice.
This army is so beautiful, and he's actually painted his Marneus Calgar version of his model in that Silver Skulls color scheme. Silver Skulls could be any chapter.
Yeah.
So you could run them as Blood Angels. You could have a silver Dante and have them as silver Blood Angels. You could have a silver, I don't know, Helbrecht, and all of a sudden they're now going to play as Black Templars.
Yeah.
So that would be my recommendation: is paint your Space Marines silver or gold, something metallic that's easy to rattle can on.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a great gold color, I'd recommend the Army Painter Speed Paint Gold. That is dreamy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
because that used to be the old school rules, and especially in 9th edition, like your opponent need to identify via color what faction you're playing. So because obviously back in the day, every faction had their own rules, but now Space Marines are Space Marines unless you got your supplement codex.
Yeah.
So paint them all grey, having a grey Dante.
Yeah.
You know, you can have loads of intercessors, assault intercessors, all grey. One day you can swap out Dante for Marneus.
Yeah.
Marneus for Calgar.
Whoever.
And
Marneus Calgar is the same person though.
Yeah,
but you could swap
Rabute on about. You know what I mean?
So yeah, I think that is certainly the way to go. And I think you don't, although you could play your Ultramarines as Blood Angels, I still think there's an element there when you get to the table, you want to present yourself in a way that, you know, you don't want to lose the hobby aspect of the game, right?
So going back to what you're saying about Votan and Custodes being like a great starting unit, or starting army, would you say they're entry level in terms of competitive play because of that limited choice? Or better question, once you've built your army and you've got the mechanics down to, as you were saying, repetition of moving just a limited units, this range, knowing these data sheets, at what point do you feel, okay, I feel I've progressed into more an intermediate level now where I can get more data sheets, more rules, more reactive moves, more like moments? Or
so I still think those armies are very competitive as well. And I think actually the more you stick with a faction, the better you're going to get with it. So typically I would say actually the more you lean into that one army, the more competitive you're going to become with it, because you're going to know exactly through repetition, through practice, through experience. And this is exactly what we try to promote on the Academy, is being able to critically think, walk away from your games, really understanding what it is you did well, what you could have improved on, how you could have played differently, how you can adjust your list to have some tools to deal with that faction again if you play it. And I'm not talking about list tailoring, because that really gets me when I see it in a Facebook group, I'm playing against this army, I'm playing against knights, how should I change my list? Don't. You're just gonna essentially give your opponent a bad game. What I do like though is, okay, if I was to play against knights, how or what do I need on my list to make sure I've got a tool to deal with it? But equally, if I play against orcs with loads of models, how am I going to deal with them? So you need tools in the toolbox, different profiles, different units to cater for that. So I think if we go back to the Votan and Custodia example,
they have something for everything.
They have, and actually their core troops can do both.
No, 100%.
Hearthguard, they hit pretty hard in combat and they've got loads of shots. You know, the Custodian Guard, the generic battle line unit of the Custodians, they get rerolls, they can tackle bigger monsters, they can equally have just enough attacks to deal with a horde unit.
They get sustained fires now.
They can get some critical hits on 5s with sustained, which procs you extra hits. So for me, I think they're two factions I absolutely love for a starter. And even now, going to LVO, I'm still considering taking Custodes. And I've took them in the past to LVO on multiple occasions.
Well, this is the thing, like, adding to what you were saying there about building a list, having limited units. Like, for me, I hate this meta chase, or what people call meta, because for me, you can't look at one person's list that's won the LVO and go, right, I'm going to play this list of Necrons or whatever faction, and then I want to win with it because it's won the LVO. Because you got to look at, on the day, who did that person play into? You know, it could have had really great matchups, because there are some matchups, as we were discussing with the World Eaters and that, there are just some straight up hard counters where you're going to have a bad day. And other times, if you go first or second, that can change the game. So my advice is, if you want to get into Warhammer and you want to start playing competitive, know your data sheets inside out, know your army inside out, and have fun and play it, because you can't control what your army bring, what your opponent brings. You don't know who you're playing against other than game one.
Yep.
And just have fun.
And I think some extra little tidbits as well from me is, if you're going to collect an army, I would grab an audiobook of that same faction, listen to a little bit of the stories about those characters, because when you're painting the models and you're wanting to see them on the table, there is that, especially, I don't know, this might just be me, but I really love it when, I've listened to books on Helbrecht and the Emperor's Champion, and when they're on the table, I want to see them do really well.
Yeah.
And I might do certain things to, make sure that they get the kill and they can tackle the biggest things, to see what they can actually do.
Yeah. Make
So
it cinematic.
Yeah, it makes it like cinematic, and it creates a story. And although I'm playing still at the top levels of the game, using that, you shouldn't ever lose that. And I think this is where there's probably a different subject altogether, but where competitive play gets a bad stigma. I'm all about promoting the hobby in all the different ways. I want people to understand the lore of the armies, but not be so dogmatic that it ruins other people's experience, right? Cool. I know enough about Black Templars to enjoy using my characters, and I enjoy painting the models. I want to make sure that I put as much effort into my painting as I possibly can, so when I get to the table, I can present you with a nicely painted army that you enjoy playing against.
When you are proud of your army and they're all painted up nice and they all look uniform and you put them on the table, it's a great feeling.
It is, and it's, you get, honestly, you instantly make friends.
But it's also the reverse feeling when you get deleted in 2 seconds. It's like, hey, look how beautiful they look. Oh, there's 12 more wounds.
You will. No, there is a curse, though.
Yeah.
Whatever model you've painted last will die first. Yeah. New model syndrome.
Yeah.
But there we go. I think, to summarize, take multiple of the same units. Take an army that is a little bit all-rounder, like the Custodes, the Votan, but focus on those other things that, easy to build.
And this is on the topic of
easier
going
to learn
from,
to play. Yeah.
This is going on topic of 0 to hero.
Yeah.
Understanding your data sheets, understanding all the characteristics and movement.
Mm.
And the more reps you get, the more understanding. As we said before, knowledge is power. Yeah. And the thing is, though, even the masterclass stuff, like if you're unsure about what army you want to play, but you definitely want to get into Warhammer, the masterclass series is great. Like, I play Tyranids, I play World Eaters, I play Grey Knights, Space Marines, I play Sisters, but I'm quite knowledgeable on the game, but I don't know everything about every faction. And it wasn't until I came on the masterclass and discovered weaknesses to my army, I then wanted to understand weaknesses of every other army.
I think that was the thing, because you found that the Tyranid Masterclass reassured you of a lot of the things that you're already doing.
Yeah, 100%.
Because you got the Tyranid Masterclass originally to help you play Tyranids. And I think that's the mistake. You actually want to get the Masterclass series to help you understand what your weaknesses are, to critically think about your army list, understand what those weaknesses are. Now, when you watch all the other series videos and you know exactly, what all the weaknesses are of the other factions, you know what their stratagems are. You know the tricks that they're going to do with that stratagems, because we show you on the table. We show you how they're going to deploy those armies.
Exactly.
You're going to understand exactly what their weaknesses are and the things they hate. So then when you go back to your list building, you can be like, right, okay, so we know that Marines are quite a popular army in the meta at the moment, or maybe Necrons are. And when we say the meta, it's essentially what's popular. So if you go to an event and 50% of the population is playing Space Marines, you want probably a good chunk of your army to be able to deal with Space Marines.
Deal with infantry, yeah.
If there's only 1% of the player base at a tournament, for example, and we're getting into the weeds now a little bit, playing, for example, Knights, then you might not need to spam, anti-Knight or anti-Titanic weapons.
Because the chance of being matched against them is very slim.
Yeah. So this is where you can do, the probability to know exactly, okay, these are the things I want to maybe skew or lean my list towards in order to cater for majority of the game. But equally know, if I do face it, I know the things they hate, and I can get the most from my units by putting them in a position or using a certain combo to really nullify their effects.
100%. But just because that 1% of player is playing a faction that isn't popular doesn't necessarily mean that faction isn't good or the player's not good. So don't ever underestimate the list I've been there before.
No, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people do make that mistake of, and they go, "Oh, my list beats that list," but straight away you're underestimating the player you're going to play against.
Exactly, but there's so many variables to it. You don't know who's going to go first. You don't know what cards you're going to pull. There's so many variables to the game. Okay, sweet. So, Steve, we've mentioned that Votan and Custodes are a great starting army because it's got limited units. You get repetition in. What would be a bad example of a starting army, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, look, as we said, if you love the models, keep playing, right? You'll slowly get there, but it could take you a little bit longer. For as an example, my first starter army was Drakari.
Mine was World Eaters.
Yours was World Eaters.
Yeah, back in 2008.
So if we look at Drakari, the models are very fragile. They're actually very spiky. They're quite difficult to build, like removing the mold lines, keeping them. I know this sounds silly, but they damage really easy. And as you get more experienced with miniatures, you get the little tricks of like, getting like a magnetic sheet and then, maybe put magnets under your models so they stick down so they don't move. Like these are things you learn over time.
Yeah, especially if it's your first time ever building and you got something like really fiddly and spiky. Like, if you're not enjoying building, you're not going to enjoy painting.
Yeah,
so.
and all those little extra details, they're quite fiddly. The models are much smaller. So if you compare a Custodian to a Drakari, Witch, for example, you've got skin tones. They're very difficult to paint. You've then got all the intricate detailing of the, essentially the underwear they're wearing.
Yeah,
it's
the models are more flimsy as well.
So it is more challenging, right?
100%.
And then the issue is you end up, and I see this a lot with players that are certainly playing. They're like, "Oh, I can't go to a local club. My army's not painted." Go and play. Just play with unpainted models. The most important thing is you're enjoying your army and you're
rolling
playing
dice,
right?
And you're learning,
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to have this army and you're going to get bottlenecked and have all these blockers for you to actually get your army onto the table.
Exactly.
I also think as well is we have such high standards because there are so many incredible painters out there.
100%.
And you see their work and you're like, well, mine doesn't look like that. Mine doesn't look like the box art. So I can't play with them until they do, which is completely crazy.
Everyone starts from somewhere.
Yeah, and I think this is where now with contrast paints or speed paints have really come in because they can really help, or using an airbrush or a rattle can to really get down mass amounts of color. I mean, and even the airbrush, for example, is often perceived as an advanced tool.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, it's not as easy as using a brush.
Of course.
But as soon as you've learned the basic techniques, oh my God, it's going to make your life just a million times
for speed,
easier.
100%. Yeah.
So going back to Drakari as well, a little bit fiddly. If you misplay a unit, it dies.
Yeah,
the game is too lethal for how durable they are, right?
They're not very tough. They don't really have great invulnerable saves or saving throws. So building an army, deploying it and getting smashed the first turn is not very good.
You also need a lot more units.
Yeah.
So let's say, I don't know, you buy a unit of 5 wardens. That's going to be between 200 and 250 points, right? For 5 models that you need to build in paint. Well, to get 250 points worth of Drakari is maybe 10 to 15 models.
Easily.
And it's not just because they're a little bit bigger, they're
more,
harder to paint. If anything, it's the reverse. Yeah. So if we took Eldar, for example, right? Eldar, by the same logic, the more good versions of Dark Eldar or Drakari. If I was beginning with that army, I would focus on things like the Wraith Lord, the Wraith units, the vehicles like the Falcons, the Fire Prisms, the Night Spinners, the Wave Serpents, because they're bigger. They're nice and easy to paint. And do yourself a favor. Do things like don't try and worry about painting the inside of your canopy of the models. Get them built, paint over the glass with a nice sort of effect. In actually, that will work quite well. But again, there are ways to build armies. Like even if you said to me, Steve, how do I begin a beginner's Drakari army? I would say, right, well, go down for lots of Talos, lots of Chronos units because they're durable, they're bigger, they cost quite a lot of points, and they're still a bit flimsy to build and paint, but they're certainly easier than masses and masses of witches in whatever else. So I would focus on the more elite units, the more durable units.
100%. Yeah.
And typically Games Workshop do a pretty good job of, if it's bigger, it's probably more durable.
Mm-hmm.
So go for the larger units in the book, or the more elite versions, because that's going to be an indication of what's going to survive a little bit longer. Yeah. So there's another topic as well I want to talk about, and it's the phases in which an army can play. So my friend Jack, he, I think, started with Space Marines and then quickly moved on to Tau. And we were playing all the time, and he was so sick of losing to my Eldar. He was like, right, I'm going to Games Workshop and I'm buying a new army.
Right, yeah.
He wanted a gun line, right? He was like, I'm going to go and buy a guard army. We went to Games Workshop, we drove in, and they didn't actually have the guard starter box.
So we went from Tau to Guard.
No, he went from Space
I was
Marines
going to say,
to go to Guard because he wanted a gunline army.
was it a gunline army from Tau? Which is probably the best gunline army. Okay,
Well,
sense.
the Tau box set was there, and he was like, right, Tau it is then.
Yeah.
And he played Tau and got very, very good with Tau.
Yeah.
Very good. In the UK scene, he was one of the best Tau players I know. Really was. And really brought different lists. He knew all the different data sheets. And on the way to tournaments, me and him would actually quiz each other on our data sheets.
Yeah, yeah.
So it'd be the thing that we would do in the car, be like, right, toughness of this, how many wounds has it got? And I'd be like, okay, it's toughness that, and it's got this many wounds.
Yeah.
And we'd actually help each other on the way to a tournament learn our data sheets. Now, he had a problem. He kept losing to combat armies. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, right, okay, you need to learn a different army. Because Tau only shoot. That's all they do. So he learned orcs.
Yeah.
And he learned to play orcs, combat army. And when he went back to Tau, oh my God, he was so much better. Because
he understood the movement. He understood.
He knew what a combat player would want to do against him.
Exactly.
So he knew where to position his models to be really annoying for a combat army.
And you could take full advantage of the actual range, because that's what's so good about Tau. Like a bolt would be 24 inches, but like a pulse rifle would be 30 inches. So you get that extra range. So you deploy further back to get full range of your weapons to try and slow down a combat army. So
he got very good. And I think that's one of the issues that sometimes you can have if you play an army that plays in one phase. So World Eaters only do combat. Now, World Eaters are one of those that they've got
a few bolt pistols.
Yeah. World Eaters have minimal units.
Yeah.
Quite durable.
Very expensive.
Quite expensive per model.
Very expensive.
Very expensive per model.
Yeah.
However, they've got two things I hate for a beginner.
Okay.
One is gold trim.
Yep.
That is awful to paint.
I'm having PTSD sitting here thinking about it right now.
And if you don't paint your gold trim, they also don't look that good.
No, you need the gold trim.
You also got loads of weird skin on the 8-bound and stuff that's difficult to paint.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the next thing I hate is Angron.
Yeah, we've had this conversation.
Because, now, funny thing is, I used to love him in 9th edition when everyone else hated him.
I love the model.
Yeah, the model's great. The model's beautiful.
He's amazing.
Huh?
Aesthetically, he's amazing.
Yep. Now, the issue that he has for a beginner is the mechanic of coming back.
Yeah, you rely on it and you feel absolutely defeated and you feel like you've just lost the game. Well, at this point, you would have lost the game because he's not coming back. You've lost a quarter of your army and you feel just
deflated.
And
you'll finish that game and somebody will ask you, how did that game go? Angron didn't come back.
I lost because Angron didn't come back, yeah.
And if you win the game,
but Angron come back.
Somebody will ask you, game went well. Oh yeah, Angron came back twice.
Yeah.
Now, that's not great. It doesn't help you understand where you made the mistakes, how you lost Angron in the first place, why you've even lost Angron, and if you do get him back, how could have your opponent played better? Could they have not killed him in the phase that made him come back earlier? So I think it removes the element of being able to critically think about your mistakes, reflect actually on your gameplay, because you've got this mechanic that is so polarizing in its gameplay. And also I hate him in the books as well. He's just so annoying. But Khan the Betrayer,
Yeah, he's a badass.
he's a badass. So if you're going to play World Eaters, play without Angron, learn from your mistakes,
Yeah.
and then add him in later.
Yeah.
That would be my advice.
There's a few ways to actually play Angron though. Now you could be that, he's going to come back, so you full send him straight away. You put pressure onto your opponent. He dies, he comes back, and then you basically secured the win. Or you sit back, you got 435 points doing nothing until turn 3. You lose your assets. He comes out, you kill some things, but you lose on primary anyway.
Yeah.
So it's a very.
I would add him in after.
Yeah, he's no good for beginners because I think World Eaters have a very one-dimensional army, and I think your skill level needs to be somewhat a little bit better.
Well, you need to understand the core mechanics of the game to a very high degree.
Yeah.
You need to understand movement, piling in, consolidating, being able to really make the most of multiple combats, multiple fights, how to work around things like fight first, interrupting. Positioning is so important.
No, 100%. Even though you've got that extra movement on them and you think, oh, it's okay, you can just throw them anywhere. No, even though you've got that extra movement, you can't afford to fail a charge because it's not like, oh, I'll come in and I'll shoot you there and I'll charge into you and I'll mop up whatever left. You've got no guns, so if you fail that charge, you're standing there and you're just hoping for your runs.
You really need to know all the advanced tricks of World Eaters.
100%, yeah.
So I think, that we haven't spoken much about like Xenos races, things like orcs.
Tyranids.
You don't need Tyranids.
Tyranids great.
But orcs are fun.
They're durable as well with T5 bodies.
Yeah.
Great OC.
The issue for a beginner is actually collecting the army. You're going to need so many boys, so many trucks. It's a huge collection to get. Same with AdMech as well.
It's very similar to what we said about the custodes. Like with the custodes, you buy them. There's limited army. They're very expensive in points. You have a few models, but there you go. But with orcs, they're very cheap in points, so you need to buy loads and loads, which is loads of building, loads of painting, loads of data sheets to understand.
That orcs is really a long-term hobby project.
Yeah.
People do it because they love orcs. Some of the most passionate players I've ever met are orc players. They love their orc army. It's always what they've used. They've got models going back 20 years, and it's probably taken that long to paint them. So for me, they fall in that category of very difficult to collect. The same would be probably for AdMech as well. Huge model range, but in terms of how many models you need, right? Yeah. Not necessarily that they've got lots of data sheets, but you need lots of models to make the army function. So yeah, I still feel like I can't even now think of a better army than the Custodes and the Votan.
But things like AdMech as well, like even if you do like the models, we're not saying you don't buy them. We're basically saying, well, even for like finances, it's your first army, you're going to have to buy so many of these elite units to make an army work. It's just very expensive. Or with Custodes, three wardens in a box, 5 wardens in a box.
Yeah, and also the great thing about something like that as well is you're probably going to play against different armies and go, oh, I love the way Eldar play, or I love the way this army plays. And you're going to move on, right? Yeah. And it's great as your first time to have that experience, to experience a little bit of combat, a little bit of shooting. Do you like fast armies? Do you like the more slower, more durable armies like Death Guard, for example? So if you really like Terminators and you prefer that sort of slow army, then you could play Death Guard, which again, I actually think is not a bad starter army because
durable.
The army's nice and durable. If you really lean into the Terminator build, it's more elite as well. So a lot less models needed, like the Death Shroud.
2 up, 4 ups everywhere.
Yeah. So again, it's not too bad. Well, I think the only limitation there is its speed. So you sometimes don't feel like you can, get across the board very easily. And that's a very difficult play style to get good at as well, is having a slower army and performing well with it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. You can deep strike in the Terminators, but this starts getting to more advanced kind of techniques and stuff. So, okay. So there we have it then. Basically, we've established that when you're new to the game and you want an army, look for something with minimal data sheets that you like the look of, that it's easy to paint, durable, and you can have all aspects of the game. Because I think if you're new to the game and you lose that shooting phase, or you don't have any combat phase, then you'll suffer.
Yeah. So let us know, would you start with the army that you originally started with.
Yeah.
Would you have started with World Eaters going back now? If you had to go again, would you start with World Eaters?
Yeah. They look cool. Funny story is, I brought some World Eaters, painted them all up, and then my friend actually wanted to get into Warhammer, and I had some Space Marines and stuff. So I had Tau, and I gave, this is like 3rd edition, and I gave my World Eaters. This is when World Eaters was still a part of Chaos.
Yeah.
We had Noise Marines. It was all part under one faction. So I gave them to my friend to start playing, and yeah, here we are now.
Nice.
Yeah, as a starter army, no, it's not the best starter army now. I agree with Custodes, but I didn't have Custodes back then. I didn't have Votan back then.
But now, we haven't spoke about Grey Knights.
I like Grey Knights. I've got Grey Knights.
Grey Knights, I would put in that same category as Custodes, actually. Minimal data sheets, fairly easy to paint,
If anything,
easy to build.
Going back to what we first said about Space Marines, you said Space Marines aren't a great starter army, but Grey Knights, you've ticked a box for Space Marines because they're like firstborn. You've got limited army choice,
Yep.
durability,
Yep.
cool mechanics in combat and
Mhm.
psychic attacks and shooting. They've got uppy down, they've got all the gameplay. Grey Knights, mate.
You're going Grey Knights?
End the podcast, Grey Knights for the first starter army.
Yeah. There we have it.
I'm actually leaving now to go and buy myself a combat patrol on Grey Knights.
Well, I actually bought 2 the other day.
Okay then. Well, I'm going to go buy 3. And I'm going to go and sign up to the masterclass and watch Grey Knights.
I love it. Right. We'll see you on another episode. Take care.
In a bit. Now, Grey Knights are cool.